Hi, this show talks about books that feature mental health and mental illness topics. The discussion will be from the point of view of mental health professionals. There are many books that include this topic, and my hope is that more and more people know about them because they help to decrease the stigma and help people not feel so alone in their struggle. I am your host, Robin Tamanaha, licensed marriage and family therapist. Joining me today on this episode is my guest, Melissa Munoz. Today we will be talking about the graphic novel Guts by Raina Telgemeier, which is about a girl who experiences anxiety from a scary event, which then starts to affect different areas of her life. But before delving into the graphic novel, I'd like to first introduce my guest, Melissa. Hi, Melissa.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for being my guest today. Would you like to say a few things about yourself before we get started?
Sure, yeah. Just let people know that, I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. Most of my experiences come from working with children, so I do have more of a specialization in learning how to kind of work with children and creative means, and one of those creative means definitely sometimes are books or art. So I was definitely interested in reading this graphic novel because of the fact that it's a graphic novel that has to do with anxiety specifically for this, young girl. So, yeah. I'm a therapist, and thanks for having me.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're also a fan of graphic novels.
Yeah, aside from just, being interested in children's therapy, my own hobbies, yes. I like to read comics, graphic novels, like to draw, definitely, those kind of indirect means of expressing yourself, so I do like to, do that on my spare time.
Cool. I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about this one.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, this is a children's graphic novel. It's recommended for ages 8 to 12 years old. The story follows the main character, Raina, as she experiences anxiety, and it follows how it had impacted her life, specifically attending school and being around her peers. When her anxiety continues to build, it becomes too much to ignore, leading Raina to work on it in therapy. This graphic novel has been on the bestseller lists and top 2019 lists by USA Today, New York Times, Washington Post, Forbes, NPR, Time, Amazon, Today.com, Chicago Public Library, and School Library Journal. Before we delve into different parts of the graphic novel, I want to first give you the disclaimer that there will be some spoilers in this episode. So if you don't want to know any spoilers, I recommend that you read the book first, then come back to this episode. If you don't mind hearing about spoilers, or if you've already read the book, go ahead and continue listening. So let's get started. Melissa, do you want to start us off with the first topic of the book?
Yeah, sure. So for me, where I'd like to begin talking about it, this book really kind of exceeded my expectations of a children's book, a graphic novel even, that has to do with mental health topics. And the thing that probably I liked most about the book was how well the author was able to portray different points of view.
Mm-hmm.
To start, I wanted to talk to you about what I thought about the point of view that she discussed, the author, Raina, that she discussed in terms of other people's point of view in the graphic novel. So, as Robin said before, the main character is Raina, so this is based off of the author's, personal experiences as a child. And the main character is having her own experience of anxiety after something that happens that really just kind of is the triggering event. And then after that, it just kind of suddenly came on, and it was really hard, I think, for people to piece together as to what was going on. I liked that the author spent a lot of time focusing on, or even at least just drawing and showing us the reactions of other people as they're witnessing Raina and the way that she's behaving and the way that she's kind of changing in response to that anxiety, because I don't know of a lot of books or other examples in media where we really get to understand, well, how does this person that is anxious, how is everybody else kind of looking at them, and and what are the kind of things that they might be thinking or assuming about the person with the anxiety.
Yeah, definitely. So for this, when it came to others people's reaction, are you thinking more because there were many different like points of view when it came to others in her life? I know there was like the peers, like her friends, as well as like parents or like the mother specifically. So for you, like, was there a certain one that you're thinking of, or one that comes to mind when it comes to like the point of view from the others on the outside?
I think an important one to bring up will be the family. The author does a good job of showing how the family life was before the anxiety-provoking event that happens for Raina, the main character. And when the author is kind of showing what the family was like before, they looked like, like a really loving family. It seemed like everybody was connected. She has 2 younger siblings, a little brother and a little sister, and parents. And, they all have dinner together, and Raina would talk about, the kind of silly things they like to eat, their specific food choices. And they were kind of silly and fun with each other. So I like that she gave that comparison of this is what Raina was like within her family before, and then this is how the anxiety has really transformed the way that she behaves in her family unit, after the event. So yes, I think that from the family's point of view, I think she does a good job of showing how the parents are just very, very, and even the siblings, you can see it in their facial expressions actually. In the pictures, everybody just looks very puzzled in her family. Like, what is going on? Like, she's behaving weird, Like, she was, part of what she was going through was that she was afraid of being sick.
Right.
She had, like, a fear of getting sick. So if anybody in the house even had the slightest appearance or symptom of possibly being under the weather, like a tummy ache or something, she would want to just, like, vacate the premises. She was staying outside for hours on end in one part of the book. I remember that. And I know you could see on the faces of, like, the parents and the siblings that were trying to invite her in or were just, like, passing by her. They look completely perplexed. They didn't know what to do, what to say. It's just like, what's going on with you? We don't know how to respond.
Yeah. I agree. And to put things in perspective for the listeners too. So what had pretty much happened was things were pretty much going fine up until Raina experienced somewhat of like a stomach ache right after eating dinner, and I believe there were artichokes. It was artichokes, yeah. That was in it, and for some reason she ended up getting sick and like rushing to the bathroom in the middle of the night. So that led to this like fear of becoming sick with the next fear of throwing up. And there was a part in the novel where she's home, and I think it was her younger brother that looked like he had some sort of a cold, or he was on the couch with clear like cold-like symptoms, and she just had freaked out. And the parent was there kind of perplexed like at what was going on, but what she was experiencing was so much like on the inside, like this internal sense of panic that was, and this is pretty common I think when it comes to anxiety too, is the difficulty communicating like what you're experiencing. It's just all jumbled up on the inside. So I think it definitely did leave outsiders kind of just confused and not knowing like what was going on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was important to show that in a graphic novel to do 2 things, in my opinion. Number 1, I think normalize that experience for people who maybe know someone who has experienced anxiety or does currently have anxiety. It normalizes that experience of, I feel completely lost and I don't know what is happening or what to do. I think especially for loved ones, for caregivers, for parents, it's really kind of discouraging because then you feel kind of helpless. That may lead to you maybe having some reactions that aren't very helpful, just in an effort to kind of like scramble to try to help them, maybe trying to pressure them to talk or explain, and maybe in the moment, like you're saying, that's just not possible because of how strong the physical and even possibly like the cognitive, which are the thoughts, how strong that anxiety is at the moment. I also think that it was important for the author to show other people's perspective of, how kind of confusing the experience of anxiety is to watch and witness. Mm-hmm. And not even knowing at that point that it's anxiety, right? Because you have no idea what's going on. I think the other reason why it's important that she put that and showed that in the graphic novel is for people that have anxiety or have experienced it to also see that perspective, to put themselves in the shoes of their loved ones, to perhaps even, in a sense, kind of help them maybe be more compassionate towards their family members who may not know what's going on, may not necessarily be trying to make things worse or be, uncaring about it. I think we, in our experience of anxiety, get caught up in what we're feeling and forget that other people have their own reaction and feelings too, and it's important to know that they may not know what's happening with you, and it's not that they don't want to help you or don't want to respond. They're just kind of frozen and waiting for, I think, some more information. Mm-hmm. So I think it was important to normalize it by showing other people kind of being confused and lost too, and also let people with anxiety see, okay, I have to remember that from the outside looking in, this doesn't make sense, what other people are saying.
Yeah. I like how at some point along in the book, the mother, I think it was the mother that had pretty much noticed how Raina's anxiety was just continuing to increase and brought up a discussion about it, right? Mm-hmm. And which then ultimately led to her, in therapy. But what was nice is that, like, the parent just had, like, a discussion with her about it and, like, acknowledging that, like, something may be wrong because she's, like, not maybe wrong, but that Raina's experiencing something that's becoming very overwhelming. And I think for her, it had gotten to the point where it really started to trickle and affect different areas of her life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that was a good demonstration of how someone who is on the outside looking in at this person having this anxiety experience, how they can sort of try to bridge that gap in understanding by waiting, for a moment when maybe things are a little bit calmer. The person doesn't seem like they're actively, like, anxious, to bring up a conversation in a very kind of kind way like that. Like, I noticed that it looks like things are really hard for you right now, and, let's talk about that and what might be going on, and, because I can see that it's really affecting you, so that it doesn't come from a place of sounding very, like, judgmental or shaming or, like, interrogating, like, what's happening to you, explain it, like, cut it out, the messages that basically the anxious person may feel. So, yeah, I thought it was nice the way that she brought it up, and I thought that was a very good example for adults and parents and anyone, really, that has anxiety.
Definitely. Let's talk about maybe the internal experience, like the experience on the inside that an individual with anxiety might be going through. One is just this kind of experience physically. I think the good thing about this being a graphic novel is the pictures were amazing. And when it came to the experience of anxiety, the pictures that were drawn really, really did convey what it would be like a day in the life of anxiety.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the drawings. Anxiety is a difficult experience to put words to. Mm-hmm. I think it's even a difficult experience to draw, to be honest, to try to portray, but art is kind of that magical tool that we have as humans to be able to express things maybe better than words can, and I do think the author really capitalized on art, using the art to do that in this book, because, as a personal disclosure, like, I am someone that manages anxiety for myself, that grew up as an anxious child. I do understand all of these internal experiences that the main character was having. And the way that it was drawn, just showing, how she kind of had these symptoms just start to build. It might start with maybe her stomach feeling a little bit funny. And then it kind of just graduates to like this panic attack experience where it's like she can't even stand and she's on the floor and everything around her feels like it's moving. There's like green lines like to signify the feeling of sickness and of feeling weak and heavy, I was just amazed and blown away by how the art really could show somebody how overpowering anxiety can be sometimes in some moments. That it's not something that is just very easy to turn away from or shut off.
And I also noticed too how it almost like played with dimensions in a way, like falling through the floor or feeling like almost this like outer body experience. Like the way the pictures were shown, I think really, really did a good job in conveying like why this is something that makes it so overwhelming that it's hard to put words to when someone's going through, because it's like very much like this physical experience. And even there was like even a picture where she's laying down still, like laying down holding like a stuffed animal, but like you said, the lines were drawn green, but they were like wavy green, like ocean wavy green. Yeah. So there was still like movement in the background, so it's like she's still, but like outside or like around her, it just doesn't feel that way. So I thought that was pretty neat to see drawn, and I think it definitely helped convey things.
Yes, and to add to that, I like what you said about dimensions. So yes, so there are pictures where she's shown falling through the floor, like you mentioned, or even kind of just like floating up above to the ceiling. In those very same pictures, some of them you do also see the other people around, for example, her parents, and they're just kind of standing around her actual physical body, and then there's the visual representations of like her body hovering over her herself in that scene, or herself like falling through the tiles, the floor. And I think that is a really great way to show people that one of the reasons why I think it's so hard to put words to anxiety in the moment is because you are completely flooded. Right. Physically speaking, it's almost like you are in a different dimension, so to speak. You may know, maybe you're not completely disoriented. You may still understand, I'm at home, I'm at school, wherever it is that this is happening. But it's almost like you've lost control of your body. Right. And your body is taking you somewhere else. It's taking you through the floor where you feel like you're sinking, where you feel like you're floating above your head because it just feels so overwhelming and it doesn't make any sense. Why are you so nervous all of a sudden? Like, why am I so worried in her case about getting sick? She didn't have any evidence or symptoms that she herself were sick, but yet here she is on the floor like panicking about it and she can't stop it. She has lost control, and I think that those pictures of being like almost on another dimension really illustrates that well and can hopefully help people understand why in the moment of the panic, of the anxiety attack, people may not respond to you, even if you're trying to comfort them by saying nothing's wrong, like we're okay, we're safe, I'm here, you're not sick, this or that. It doesn't matter, what you ask the person in that moment or what you're trying to tell them. They're in a different space completely. And even later, oftentimes, and I think Raina started to experience this when she went to therapy, even after the fact, backtracking and trying to talk to the anxious person, like, well, what was that? What happened? What set you off? A lot of times you hear the same thing, which is, I don't know. It's almost like they blacked out.
Yeah, and it usually takes some time, right, to, like, reflect back and think about, like, what we call this, like, in therapy, triggers were, right? And I know, like, sometimes, like, for panic attacks, there necessarily won't be a trigger, right? It'll come out of nowhere. And some of what Raina experienced was that, but some of it was also just tied to her worry about puking or about getting sick. So I know there were different triggers in the book, aside from what we had previously mentioned, which was seeing her brother look like he was possibly had like cold-like symptoms on the couch. Another, I think, was very obvious was seeing Artichoke. She was given that because it was leftovers for lunch at school, like it was in her lunch bag. So seeing that made her feel sick, and which led her to just throw it away. Can you think of any other triggers she might have experienced that you remember?
I know that one thing was she was definitely, and she mentioned it too at the beginning of the book. She kind of goes over how she's sort of this like anxious and shy person. Shy meaning having trouble sometimes, maybe with interacting with people socially. And anyway, I'm saying that because I think one of her triggers later on in the book, after she has her initial anxiety attack that leads to this series of anxiety problems, is that she was going to have to do a presentation at school.
Oh, yeah.
And that, like, just hearing about the fact that she was going to have to present in the future in class immediately made her nervous. Like, I think she immediately started having, I believe she was experiencing some stomach pain. And if not, she definitely was having, like, the worry-based thoughts of, like, oh my God, gotta be up there in front of people and talking. And so she was triggered on the day of the presentation. She was trying to present and she couldn't even get any words out. And immediately you could see visually that her stomach started hurting and sank and she had to run out the room.
She ran to the bathroom, I think. So that was like another trigger. Yeah.
Yeah, in that case, it sounds like, even before the panic attack happened, she just had a predisposition to maybe social anxiety, just being afraid about certain kinds of interactions with people. And a big one for people that have social anxiety is performing. So, like giving a presentation in front of a class or at work, right? So I think that was a trigger.
Yeah.
It was something she was already not confident about and nervous about. And then the fact that she had been through that loss of control and, having panic attacks, that was a trigger that pushed her over the edge and had her feel stomach problems. And that's what she's afraid of, at that point in the book. She's afraid of getting sick and throwing up.
And that was like a huge theme, because I remember like another trigger, which was a friend of hers shared food with her. And she had to just abruptly like use the restroom. So that was one. And then she was kind of, I don't know if she was unsure about like the food part, or if maybe like her friend was sick and they were next to each other, and so maybe she would get sick. So just like this whole theme of like being around others or just food leading to getting sick was like a huge, I noticed like a huge progression of things.
The other thing that was interesting about this book, as you're describing, the progression of her anxiety, she had this experience where it wasn't necessarily one type of anxiety. I think the book basically dipped into a lot of different kinds of anxiety.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that too. So what you're describing in terms of the food and being afraid of getting sick, that is almost like a phobia of getting sick, right? So you're going to avoid things that you associate with getting sick. In her case, she had artichoke the night that she got sick. Her brother was also, I think, kind of sick or stayed home from school or something, because the mother mentions, oh, maybe we got his stomach flu. And then that makes her afraid of just catching germs from other people, right? But then she also has these different kinds of anxieties that start to manifest. For example, the social anxiety. And even another one are the odd sort of behaviors that she ends up engaging in. That is a part of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder.
We're talking about like the kind of the avoidance of touching certain things or certain foods, stuff like that she was experiencing, right?
So she was very particular about what kind of food she would eat. They would show her in different parts of the book being very selective about what she was eating, which is not a symptom by itself, but it is very drastically different from what she was like before and what she was willing to eat before. So when somebody is restricting their diet out of fear, that's when we say that it's an issue, because it's a dysfunction. It's something that is out of their norm. So she would, there was a scene where she, I think it was at a pizza place, and she would only serve herself lettuce, a few croutons, and a little bit of Italian dressing. And I remember that really vividly, because you see on the table the rest of the family, having a bunch of different toppings on their salad and other foods. And she restricted herself to that because she was trying to control, you know, something to prevent herself from hopefully getting sick. And that is another aspect of obsessive compulsive disorder. The thing that stuck out to me too was actually one of the times she avoided going home or going inside the house because she was worried about catching her brother's germs, I think. That's when you described that, you know, he was home from school. She, I think, ended up going on a bike ride.
Yes, and doing laps. A certain amount of laps. And I remember her saying, one last one for, what was it?
Good luck,
for good luck
or something.
Yeah. It had to be a certain number.
So she fixated on, again, nothing wrong with riding a bike, but she was very fixated on just achieving a certain number of laps. Mm-hmm. It was an excessive amount. I mean, this is a young kid after school, you know. Mm-hmm. Typically, they need to rest, eat dinner, and here she is, like, forcing herself to do laps for the sake of feeling some sort of false safety, you know? Like, if I do this, maybe I'll have good luck, maybe I'll be out of the house and avoid getting sick, and then this is what I just have to do.
Yeah, or sometimes it is just that, where it's like, if I do this thing, or these amount of things, that means that I won't get sick, or that means that I will be okay. So it's almost like making up these kind of rules in a sense to help provide some sort of safety. So it then becomes kind of like a must, where it's like, no, not, and that's how kind of like obsessive compulsive disorder will kind of just like continue to progress and become a daily part of someone's schedule. It's like, well, now it's become so routine that I got to do this X amount of things in order to do this, or in order to be able to leave the house, or in order, yeah.
And the book shows how dysfunctional that was, meaning how much it was interrupting her life, because, for example, you know, not only is that going to take time out of your schedule to have to do these this series of behaviors anytime you're feeling anxious, because that's kind of like your way of trying to do a magic spell to be safe. But also, in her case, it was derailing things that had to happen, like daily necessary activities or things that had to happen for her to be healthy. The prime example that I can think of is how she didn't sleep. She was losing sleep because she was staying awake. I think it was for the purpose of making sure that, like, one of her siblings wasn't sick or something, or I forgot what it was in response to, but she had this thought of, like, I need to not sleep, and that was really problematic. You see her the next day at school really struggling to stay awake. Mm-hmm. She wasn't really, it even shows her, like, the teacher's talking, and you can see the words drawn on the page as if, you know, her attention was having tunnel vision. It was like darkened, couldn't really make out what the teacher was saying. And that's a good example of how she's not able to retain information. She's not able to pay attention, to be present, to take anything in, because of the fact that she's sleep deprived, which comes from the anxiety. So this is just like this whole negative cycle that's starting to happen.
Yeah.
That maybe initially the obsessive or even just other anxious kind of like mechanisms, like being avoidant or doing a ritual, you know, maybe that was something that helped her at first, but now look at how it has led to just this dysfunction. It's not something that she can keep up, you know? And that's when, at some point, either the parents or herself, or if it's an adult, you know, has to kind of stop and ask, what do I need to do to resolve this? Because what I've tried has not worked.
Yeah, and when it comes to most diagnoses, but also, you know, with anxiety, is that's like the crucial part, is like, it's now the symptoms have increased enough to where it's impacting different areas of the person's life, whether it's just daily life, like sleep and eating, or work, school, or with peers. I think with youth, like with children and teens, oftentimes the first thing that especially the parents will notice is when the school part is being affected, whether it's going to school or the grades or just achievement at school is not what it was before. So that's usually the kind of telltale sign, like, okay, maybe like there's something going on that's like big enough, because it's like definitely, you know, taking a toll and impacting my child's education, right? Want to talk about therapy? I think the The graphic novel did a really good job explaining therapy, and not just explaining therapy, but also explaining like different therapy, and then also how therapy is done with anxiety. I think in the beginning of her treatment and therapy, I thought was really interesting was, she met with the therapist, and the therapist had asked her like how she was feeling. I think it was how she was feeling. And on the next page was this giant like thought bubble of all these different feelings and emotions and worries and thoughts that were clearly like swarming around her mind. And I think, it was, will you tell me a little about why you're here today in your own words? And she just stalls and says, and then swirling around her is like pain, choking, scared of, like drowning, like all these thoughts. And then what comes out is her saying, I don't know. So she had like a kind of, although there was a lot going on within her, this is something we see like realistically in therapy, is it does take time for people to open up, because it's kind of uncomfortable, to talk about. And if you picture like a young child or a teenager, trying to express like these probably embarrassing things that they're thinking or feeling, or things that they don't feel so great about, I think the book did a good job in conveying that. What do you think of that part?
Yeah, I like the way that they portrayed the whole therapeutic experience in general. I do think that they just kind of normalized, especially for a child or a teenager, like you mentioned. It is really hard to just kind of jump right in and start telling a stranger about your most private experiences and details. Not only that, but also just developmentally speaking, children and teenagers aren't necessarily in a space yet where they have a very clear command of just being able to connect the dots between this thing happened, therefore, that logical reasoning and that cause and effect, and being able to really be good with identifying abstract things such as emotions. That's still being worked on. That's still under construction. So you send a child to therapy, and if it's talk therapy, usually it is to begin with, at least sometimes, they're going to struggle to just jump right in. So I like that this author kind of, showed more realistically how the process begins, which I think it's, there was after Raina struggled to kind of put words to everything she was thinking, like you described, all those words, the therapist kind of just started asking her about her life in general, and Raina brought up her brother, and okay, what's his name? And, tell me a little bit about him. So she showed the therapist doing something we call relationship building, which is really important for kids. Once they start to feel kind of safe and comfortable, just naturally they're going to be able to express themselves better. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I do agree with you that they did a really good job kind of showing the process of therapy in a realistic way.
And going off of what you mentioned too, is like oftentimes, children are brought into therapy usually because it's required by others or brought up and suggested by others, like a parent is there. There's also different types of therapy, and we use a lot of the creative ones when it comes to youth, and the graphic novel touched on different ones, not just talk therapy, but also sand tray, which is one really good form of play therapy, and art interventions. So that was really good to see. And there were different, what do you call those, like squares of her doing different types of...
the panels.
Different panels showing her using all the different types of expressive forms of therapy that don't necessarily require like just naming things. It's another way for the child or individual to express and convey what they're going through, and in a way that really works for them.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that it was important to show her using play therapy, in particular sand tray therapy, which is a part of that, and also art, to be able to kind of just express herself. Because I think it's important for adults who maybe don't know a lot about therapy, especially not a lot about therapy in the way that it's conducted with children. It's very important to understand that just because maybe from the outside as an adult looking at the situation, just because to you it seems trivial, like, okay, they're just playing with toys, or they're just playing with sand, or she's just kind of like painting or scribbling, like what's the purpose of that? How is this helping? It's really important to understand that that is the language of the child.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of indirect form of expressing themselves, whether it's through play or through art, just like for an adult, maybe being able to vent with a friend or discuss a really troubling event with a therapist, just like the talking part is really healing for the adult, the playing out something, the expressing something through art, whether it's drawings or music or writing or whatever, that is how the child processes what they're going through, and that is what's going to help them connect the dots necessary to even be able to verbalize what is happening to them, what has happened to them, or what they even need. So that is a really important bridge that art and play provide in therapy. And I think it was important that she showed that, to be able to explain that to people that maybe don't know that, or maybe have a misunderstanding of play therapy and art therapy.
And I think too, like, as adults, like, just talking is our, most of the time, main form of communication. So sometimes it can be kind of difficult to kind of grasp, like, other forms, but there are a lot of trainings. I know I did when I was a child therapist too, of different forms of interventions. Like with children, there are workshops and courses on like sand tray, art therapy. There's even something called psychodrama that involves the other forms of communication, other forms of expression, which is very, very important, you know. And I think, and too, this book is also goes to show that, I mean, this is an author who experienced anxiety, ends up writing a book in the form of a graphic novel. And throughout this, and this character is very much like an extension of her, was also into art. So it ended up being something really great that I think others can relate to, and also in the visual form. And although there were, you know, more creative aspects and then, you know, talk therapy type aspects in the book when it came to therapy, still there were components of interventions that we use as therapists when it comes to treating anxiety. One is deep breathing and different forms of relaxation, including grounding. So Raina was taught how to deep breathe properly and also how to do physical grounding, which is super important for anxiety. And also rating scales. So when it comes to anxiety, it's very, I think the automatic thing is probably to think like, this is extreme and this is like the most I've ever experienced. However, when we take a step back with clients and we kind of look at things, we do teach them how to rate things on a scale of 1 to 10, right? Being with 0 or 1 being it's non-existent or the very minimal amount of distress you've ever experienced, to 10 being the highest it could ever be. And it's important to know that there are numbers in the middle, and that sometimes certain experiences can be rated like a 5 or a 6, not always like a 10 plus. Yeah. Right? And so Raina was also taught these really evidence-based type of skills for how to manage her anxiety.
Yes, and just to touch on the grounding piece, just in case people don't know, so grounding in therapy, it sounds very much like the word itself, which is, you know, to try to help keep yourself in the present and not floating away with your anxiety. So, like, maybe escalating it any further. So you're trying to ground, keep your feet on the ground. Think of it that way. And in Raina's case, she used physical type of grounding, so a physical type of relaxation to keep herself in the present. And that is by deep breathing. And the way that's achieved is that you teach the person how to properly deep breathe. Believe it or not, there is a way to properly deep breathe. Yep. A lot of people don't know. You don't want to do it ineffectively because it could either just be, you know, at best case scenario, if it doesn't work out, you're just not going to feel any relief. At worst case scenario, you're going to hype yourself up to hyperventilating, which we want to avoid. So she learned how to kind of count her breaths, pay attention to them in and out, focus her attention at the same time on her feet digging into the floor. All of these things, you know, focusing on the breath, feeling the sensation of like your feet rubbing into the floor. These are things to sort of, in a way, distract herself from being carried away into that other dimension of anxiety, you know, of having that out-of-body experience, of having that sinking feeling, of feeling like you're about to pass out, or even passing out like a lot of people do during anxiety attacks. So that's what we mean when we say grounding. It's some kind of activity to help hold you in the present, to help you maintain basically a sense of control over your own body by deep breathing, by distracting your mind with certain thoughts, or by doing physical stuff like I'm touching this soothing object, or I'm asking someone for a hug, or I'm digging my feet into the ground and paying very close attention to that experience.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely paying close attention and believing in it. I think one, which the book does touch on, is not just using the tools and the skills and the coping skills, but also intently believing that, you know, this will provide some sort of relief. Because sometimes it may not, if someone may just kind of go through and do the skills, but it's kind of just like, just to get through it, but not actively doing it with the intent like, okay, this might work, right?
Yeah. I think that definitely goes with the part about you're trying to be present, meaning believing in it, like don't give in to the thoughts, because the thoughts are the reflection of your anxiety, the thoughts of this isn't working, and whatever, I just need to get through this quickly, and it's supposed to work. Oh, look, I knew it wasn't going to work. You are what you think. I do believe that. So if you're giving into those thoughts, you are setting yourself up to fail, to continue to feel anxious. If you at least can try to notice the thoughts and turn your attention back into what you're trying to do, whether it's, okay, I'm noticing my breath, I'm breathing in and out, or I'm noticing, you know, that I'm stretching or trying to dig my heels into the floor, you can at least control your attention. You may not be able to control the negative thoughts that come up, but you can control where your attention lies.
And there's different types of grounding too. I know this one touched on physical, but there's also different types. There's like mental grounding, there's soothing grounding, there's all different types. So sometimes it's also just finding the one that you kind of like, you feel like, oh, like this one works for me, or I notice this one helped me like detach the most from the distressed feeling that I was experiencing.
Yes, and that's a good point. You have to find what works for you, and you also have to find what works for you for different moments. For some people, like Raina, let's say, when she's having a very intense physical experience, maybe physical grounding is the best thing to do. For when she's having like anxiety-based thoughts, maybe she needs to do soothing grounding and thinking of things that are pleasant or reassuring or positive, or like naming the people that love her, you know. So
that one includes visualization too, right?
Yes, it does, yeah. So you're right. I think it depends on the person, and it depends on the situation too for that person.
Fortunately, there's a wealth of different types of coping skills and interventions that us therapists use. So it just takes kind of going through different ones and doing trial and error and just finding the best fit. One last topic I think maybe we could touch on is, I like the incorporation of the parents.
Yes.
In the book. And I think it was also helpful that the mother was very attuned to her child, knowing that, you know, okay, maybe, you know, getting some therapy would be helpful. But also the parents did assist her as best they could, I think, possibly collaborating with the therapist on this. So this is also why parent involvement in therapy with kids and young teens is important, because in the therapy room is one thing, right? We can do a lot of skills, do a lot of practicing and coping and all that. But sometimes it also helps when there's an extension to also outside of the therapy office. Like what can be done in the places that either trigger them or the places that maybe they'll find the most comfort. And I think in this graphic novel, what was touched on was the home and how the parents could work with her to create like a safe, soothing space in the home, because when it comes to anxiety or just distress in general, it's nice to have a place you can go to help do a reset or help decompress and like calm down in a way.
Yes, I agree. That was something I liked a lot about this book also, is that I thought it sent a good message for everybody when it comes to dealing with an anxious child or adult, just somebody that you care about, or even yourself. There's a healthy balance of people, such as parents in Raina's case in this book, people lending support, and the parents did that, like Robin said, by being attentive, just noticing that there's something that seems different about her normal behavior or functioning, and kind of trying to very gently, talk to her about it and explore different ways of dealing with it. And then taking that feedback from the therapist later, such as restructuring her room, even though, they didn't have a choice but to share rooms because it was a small house with 3 children and 2 adults. And I think even at one point they host a relative, a grandma or somebody, right?
So. Yeah.
So full house, can't help it, But they were able to create a little bit of space and privacy in her own room by putting up curtains and everything you said. So anyway, there's that balance of other people supporting you or the person with anxiety, such as parents or loved ones or friends or community or the therapist. And then there's also that balance, though, that you also have to do your part. The person with the anxiety has to do their own part in challenging themselves, kind of pushing themselves to maybe slowly test out and tolerate things that make them uncomfortable, testing out their skills and learning how to manage the anxiety so it can stop just totally derailing their day. Such as when Raina, in one part, the whole book, she's afraid of food and just eating something that's going to make her throw up or contracting a sickness from someone. She goes to visit a friend. And when she goes to visit the friend, the family's having something that she's never seen before. It's a friend of a different culture. And she's very nervous initially about trying the food, but she's able to not fixate on the thoughts or feelings of the anxiety in the moment, tries the food, and basically does an experiment where she's challenging her anxiety by saying, all right, let's see, I'm afraid of getting sick, but let's do an experiment and see how this goes, and I know I can manage, my anxiety the best I can. And she didn't get sick. She actually ended up loving the food.
And I think too, before that, the therapist had also had a discussion about okay, let's not just talk about the foods you don't think you can eat. What can you eat? So kind of it started there.
Yes.
And then eventually leading to her just eating other foods. Sometimes a go-to thing, automatic thing when it comes to anxiety is this avoidance. And just continue to avoid in hopes that that'll just make things go away. But it's counterproductive, and actually the avoidance can actually make this continue.
Yeah.
So the therapist, worked with her to at least have a discussion like, what would it be like to eat this food or that food? And then also going back to what you said about the working with the parents, I think it was the therapist that had met with the parents to discuss how Raina does need some space and privacy. So that's why the parents did put a kind of like a curtain divider in the bedroom, which helped her essentially because it decreased her being overstimulated. And it allowed her to have some privacy, which would then help her self-regulate. And when it comes to self-regulate, we mean just like a way to kind of use the coping skills or do certain things on your own to manage the distressing symptoms that you're experiencing. And for Raina, the noise was like an issue. There was like some snoring going on, which happens sometimes with relatives, right? So she was using earplugs, and then also led to, I think towards the end was doing some de-stimulating things like putting on her little earbuds and listening to music while she's drawing cartoons.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another important part for the challenging yourself, having to push yourself to try different things to figure out what might be helpful. So, the parents were able to help support her in that by giving her a space to be able to kind of explore what might be helpful. And like you said, she did end up, finding that she really did like drawing and that the music was like really helpful just to help her kind of process her day. And that's important for anybody, whether it's a toddler, a teenager, or an adult. We all need to have space every day to decompress and let our day's experiences really like sink in and just be processed. Feel the feelings, let them pass so that we can be ready for the next day and not have any lingering issues. Yeah.
So overall, I like the book. I thought, I'm a visual learner, so for me this was great and right up my alley. But also because I felt like this was a very realistic depiction of anxiety and also therapy and how it doesn't happen overnight, right? Everything is a process. And when it comes to anxiety, especially fears or, phobias, it does need to be done step by step so that it is safe, right?
Yes, yeah.
So I like the book. Do you want to say any thoughts overall on what?
Oh, I loved it too. I think, it's clear that we were both pretty impressed from a clinical standpoint, being therapists, with the presentation the book gave. I think that it was very accurate, and not just accurate, but just helpful, and it showed a lot of helpful kind of like suggestions for people that maybe want to know how to support someone with anxiety, where to start, or where that person can start in terms of seeking some relief and some help. And also, like you said, yes, I do definitely agree that it's more realistic, because it's a decent sized, graphic novel, and it takes a while before she gets a handle on the anxiety. And also just understanding that anxiety, mental health, it's something we always have to work at. It's not something that's just great and then you're good to go, and I think that it did a good job of showing that.
Definitely. Well, again, Melissa, thanks so much for being here today. This was fun. Is there anything you'd like to share with our listeners as far as like where to find you, or if maybe they want to see more of what you're doing?
I do have a website. The website does have like a messaging system so that you can write to me if you'd like. And that website is attachmentandidentity.wordpress.com.
Great. So thanks everyone for listening. Hopefully this was informative or helpful. If you have any book suggestions or books you would like discussed on this podcast, go ahead and email it to booksbetweensessions@gmail.com. And if you're a mental health professional and would like to be on this podcast, whether it's to discuss a book or maybe even if you're an author of a book yourself, go ahead and contact me at booksbetweensessions@gmail.com. Also, this podcast is not psychotherapy or counseling. If you need to speak with a professional, you should find one local to you and contact them directly. I'll also put in my contact information if you ever want to reach out to me for therapy services. I'm located in Orange County, California. And if this is an emergency, please call your local emergency number or go to your nearest emergency department. Thank you.